In a seminal work, What is History, E.H. Carr compares history to fish on a fishmonger's slab. Says you sort of pick up the fish you want, take it home, and cook it and serve it the way you want. Now the problem is, it depends on which fish you take, and there is actually what is missing out in this definition is which fish you choose. There's an hegemony in what kind of fishes are chosen and how they are cooked and all of that, and what is presented, what is served finally, and what do people actually get to see. Now, most often, when most of us went to school, and what is taught to us as history in our schools, whichever part of the world that we are in, is essentially what the powers that be, and I'm not talking about just political power, I'm talking about political, social, and economic power. The hegemony wants us to learn. So the history textbooks in school do not tell us history, but tells us what the powers want us to know. And I'll give you a very simple example. The American Festival of Thanksgiving. The American Festival of Thanksgiving is such a colonial exercise, and it's so much a part of American culture that even Indian Americans sort of celebrate it, completely negating the fact that is actually a commemoration of the genocide of American Indians. The problem is, what really happened in history is never told, we never know, and therefore most of us do not have a critical engagement with the past, which can help us locate ourselves in the present, help us figure out our hegemony, figure out our privileges or lack of them in relation to people that we negotiate with, in relation to the society, in relation to politics. So this is completely so this is an effort. What history does is actually dehistoricize people, actually tell people a certain version of history which does not include them, sort of places history outside yourself. So this discussion now is essentially, I'm going to use 3 books to sort of see how these 3 books fundamentally alter the way that most of us perceive history, or most of us are led to perceive history. And these 3 books, one would be Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States of America. Now, most people, and I'm talking about where the history of the United States comes from, and most of the population of United States today are either colonizers or slaves, or those who have gone to United States post-colonialization looking for their future. The small minority, the minuscule minority who originally owned that land, which are called the Americas, have been completely kept out of the history of the United States. So your textbooks in the United States, your celebrations of history in the United States is essentially the white man's standpoint of what is history in the United States. And Zinn's book essentially throws a spanner at that, and he actually calls out the racism, the genocide and all, and the slavery that built what we see as the United States of America. Australia has a similar history. Australia, the genocide was even more complete. The first settlers, the British settlers in Australia, claimed that they used the legal principle, international law principle called Rex Nullius, which means a people with no land. They claimed that there were no people in Australia and systematically killed the native Australians. Either they were killed or there was an ethnocide where they were sort of raped and they were drove into the margins. So again, Australian history is sort of celebrated post-colonialism, leaving out the facts that the entire community, entire edifice of what is today Australia and Australian state is built on the foundations of genocide. A person who negotiates this, who sort of puts this bare, is John Pilger in a seminal work, A Secret Country. The Secret Country sort of, through a series of articles, traces the history of Australia, starting right from the genocidal period and the kind of people who colonized the Australian mainland to the present day dispensation, the politics of Australia today. and how it is sort of completely directed by this whole post-colonial politics and racism. And ironically and amusingly, John Pilger, who was an Australian by birth, is a persona non grata in Australia right now. The third book, closer to home and very important, and unfortunately there are not too many historians working on that, is how how Indian history has been completely Brahminized. And this is, and I'm not just talking about history textbooks in schools. I'm not, where you sort of think about Chanakya as a great, Chanakya or Kautilya as a great strategist and all of that. I'm also talking about mainstream historians who claim the left space. So if you sort of look at who these historians are, and without taking names, I can tell you that the people who are sitting at the top of the history departments, and I'm talking about pedagogical historians in India, are most of them are Savarnas. And when I'm talking about Savarnas, I'm talking about not just Hindu Savarnas, I'm also talking about Muslim, the Savarnas from all religions. And their edifice of analyzing history, however radical they claim it to be, is basically built on this particular location that they come from. So, what ends up happening is that we do not actually have a credible or a series of credible work or epistemology that has been developed, which sort of looks at lives of people bottom up, lives of ordinary people, and how history in the subcontinent actually evolved throughout whichever period one is talking about, including post-independent history. So we sort of look at Buddha as somebody who, there would be references of Buddha having had to fight the caste system and all of that, but that would be just a footnote. So the importance of Buddha in terms of the anti-Brahminical order is never comes up, nor Kabir for that matter, or even Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. I remember studying in my history books that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the main architect of the Constitution of India. So he's sort of pictured as a very sanitized version who is kept outside his caste location. Until much later I did not know about his struggles, like being thrown out of his hotel room for being a Dalit or not, despite being a superior in the office, his subordinates refusing to give him water, and the way that and the polymath that he is, the kind of writing that he has done in the 20th century, and he was perhaps the tallest intellectual that South Asia had produced, and none of this actually got into the textbooks that I studied. So the third book that I wanted to introduce in this talk is Brajranjan Mani's book, De-Brahminizing History, which actually is just a beginning, which is just a start, and which sort of should trigger the need to reread and rewrite history in terms of the reality of what actual history is, where we sort of are able to grasp this past not from the point of view of a Brahminized whole, but as from a very de-Brahminized context, where we are essentially talking about history of people, history as people would experience it, and which would mean history of oppression, which would mean history of marginalization, which would mean how people's cultural expressions, etc., were completely either marginalized or co-opted. For example, how Bharatanatyam has become a Brahmin dance form, or how Buddha has become one of the avatars of Vishnu. So I hope to continue this discussion in future episodes in terms of taking out specific incidents of history and trying to dissect it to figure out the multiple narratives around it, and go forward to see what would be the most compatible take on it. Thank you very much.